Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. I'm Exterminator, and thank you for joining me for this one. This is going to be the start of a new series I'm doing, where I go over the little kind of unknown details and little intricacies and quirks of Factorio that a lot of people may not know about or understand fully. You know, things like belt throughput and the evolution factor for biters and pollution, how all that actually works, to kind of give people a better idea if they're interested. And this first episode, we're going to be going over pollution. Now, there's going to be kind of two parts. This first part here, which will only just take a couple minutes, I'm going to go over kind of a broad overview of pollution and how it works, and just kind of give general information about it in some general details for people who, you know, are kind of just interested in the basics of how it works. And then I'm going to continue from that and really go in depth on the numbers and how it actually spreads, like mathematically, and how the numbers, the pollution generation from machines actually affects it all and affects biter attacks, so on and so forth. So if you're only interested in just a basic level of how pollution works, then you'll probably be good to go after this first couple minutes. But if you're interested in the more in-depth stuff, then definitely stick around. So we're going to go ahead and start here. I'm going to try to make it as clear as possible, make this video not too long. So we'll see how that goes. Okay. So pretty much most machines in Factorio generate pollution. You can see the pollution they generate by mousing over them once they're placed. You cannot see it here. It does not show it on this information bar, but once they're placed, you can see it on the right hand corner. This produces 10 pollution. And this is like per second. This is not just like this. It generates 10 per second, right? An assembling machine produces, if I can find it, 2.4. It's there under the electricity consumption thing. A electric miner produces 9, boilers produce 6, I believe, so on and so forth. Some things don't produce pollution, like steam engines themselves do not produce any. And then also, along with the flat amount that each machine produces, there's an amount tied into the power, which I'll go over later in the other detailed part of the video. But since powered machines take, obviously, power, if you're using steam engines, which require the boilers, which generate pollution and all that, they kind of have a pollution factor for that as well, which I'll go over. Okay, so that's pretty much how it works. Machines generate pollution and it spreads. Now, there's some things that absorb it, that slow down the spread of it and how fast it accelerates. And those are trees. Trees definitely do that, pretty much like in real life. They absorb pollution. Water absorbs it. Even the type of tiles on the ground absorb it, because each chunk has a natural absorption level, which is based on the tiles and stuff inside it. And by the way, a chunk is 32 tiles by 32 tiles. You can see it in the debug menu if you have the grid turned on. If we hit F4 here, there's all these options for the different debug menus. In the basic one, you can turn on the tile grid and it will display the tiles and the chunks. But it's 32 tiles by 32 tiles, and pretty much one tile is like a belt. So if you didn't want to do that, you could just lay out 32 belts by 32, and that's how big a chunk is. But anyway, so trees, the chunk itself has a little bit, and then spawners, biter spawners actually absorb it. And now a common misconception is people think that the evolution factor, right, how the biters evolve and become, you know, go from small to medium to big, so on and so forth. There's 3 factors for that. One is the passing of time, one is killing spawners, and then the other that affects it is pollution. A common misconception is that the evolution factor increases from pollution if the spawners absorb it. And based on everything I've read, I've looked at several wiki articles for Factorio and stuff, and based on all that said, that's actually not the case. Pollution does affect the evolution factor, but the amount it affects it by is actually based on the overall pollution you generate from all your machines, regardless of if spawners absorb them or not. So a lot of people think, and I thought this for the longest time as well, is that when the spawners absorb it, that's when it contributes to the evolution factor, but it's actually not true, according to everything I've read, is that it's really just based on the overall pollution you produce based on all your machines, regardless of where it is or what it's hitting or anything else. So that's kind of something to keep in mind, just in the back of your head. And then pretty much the pollution cloud that you see when you turn on advanced info, obviously we don't see it because there's no pollution being generated, but the pollution cloud you see, that's what triggers the biter attacks. So the spawners do absorb it, and it does affect the attacks, it's just not the evolution rate. And then when biters themselves are in the pollution cloud, that affects the attacks, which I will go over in more detail here in a minute. So that's pretty much the basics. Machines generate pollution, trees and water and chunks and stuff absorb it a little bit to slow it down. It spreads to other chunks, which is why it spreads throughout the map. And then the pollution does affect the evolution factor, but it's based on all the pollution all your machines generate, regardless of if spawners absorb it or if it's even touching them or anything else. And then the cloud itself is what affects the biter attacks on you and their intensity. So that kind of covers that bit. If you really just wanted to know the basics, that's probably all you need to know. But if you want to stick around for the details, we will get into that now. Okay, so this is where it gets kind of complicated. Right? Okay, so how to start? Okay, so like we'll go with this. This generates 10 per second, right? Okay. Well, a chunk, if we go into our debug menu here, turn on the grid, hit F5 to go into this, you can see the darker lines. This is a chunk. This square here, and each one of these is a tile, right? So if we make a belt here really quickly, you can see a tile is a belt size, so you can kind of do it that way. A chunk, and you can see this is actually in this chunk really more rather than this one, but a chunk gets filled with pollution based on things generating it. Pretty much once a chunk reaches 15 pollution in the chunk, it'll start spreading to other chunks. And then once they hit 15, they'll start spreading to other chunks. And it spreads in all four directions, so all four adjacent tiles. So this one, this one, this one, and this one, based off this guy here, will start having pollution spread to them once it hits 15 in this chunk. And then once this hits 15, it'll go here, back to this one, here, and then here, so on and so forth. Okay, so if I turn this off because it's a little bit in the way, I'm going to go into my options really quick, and for this I'm going to turn off, okay, it's already off. Okay, so what we do is if we throw some coal in here for this experiment, we throw this in here, you can look and see, if I turn on the debug menu, our pollution. So it had already hit 15 and gone into these tiles, and this far number on the left here is the pollution itself, and then this number here is the absorption factor of the chunk. I believe that's what one of the articles said. And you can see once some of these start hitting 15 or thereabouts, it is 15, but it's a little hard to tell when some numbers are moving so fast. Once they hit that amount, the pollution starts spreading, and you can see it's obviously way more here. But you can see the flashing, that's when it starts to spread. And essentially once it hits 15, it spreads at a rate of 2% of the total pollution per second to each adjacent thing. Okay, so if we turn this off, we pause the game, I'm going to switch to my monitor here, if I can get there very quickly. Make sure I'm recording, except that it's being dumb. Okay, so we're gonna go here. I guess this will just overlay over Factorio. Okay, so it spreads at 2% per second, which is 60 ticks. Per game second is 60 ticks, so one tick is 1/60th of a second. 2% of the total pollution in the chunk. So we have a quick example here. Let's say the main chunk, let's say that one where our burner miner is, has 500 pollution in it already. And the 4 adjacent ones to it already have 125 pollution in them, all right? So this main chunk is going to raise pollution in all those adjacent chunks by 10, because that's 2% of 500, while reducing its own pollution by 40, because 10 times 4, because there's 4 chunks it's spreading to, and it's spreading to 10 to each, right? Because it takes it out of that chunk when it does it, so it reduces its own pollution by 40. However, those 4 adjacent chunks, right, once they hit 15, they're going to be spreading at 2% of their current rate. So they were already at 125 for this example. 2% of that is 2.5. So they're going to spread 2.5 pollution to all the adjacent chunks to them. And the middle one we started with happens to be one that happens to be there for all 4 of them, right? Because they're adjacent. So they're going to spread 2.5 pollution back to the center chunk, which essentially means in the end, the center one is only losing 30 rather than 40 per second, because 2.5 right here times the 4 chunks equals 10, and 40 minus 10 equals 30, right? And then, so it's losing 30 plus the absorbed value of that pollution. Or sorry, of that chunk. So that's pretty much how it spreads. Hits 15, starts spreading out, and spreads at 2% of the total pollution in that tile per second. So we got that. We have a little note here. The more pollution spreads, the more is absorbed, right? So that kind of makes sense. Trees absorb it, spawners absorb it. I already went over that. Enemies, okay. So the spawners do absorb pollution, and pretty much what this means is while they're absorbing pollution, this influences the attacks and how many biters and what size of biters they send out. Obviously, if the evolution factor isn't great enough for any of the bigger ones to spawn, they won't send any out. But here's how it works. So each spawner absorbs 20 plus 1% times the chunk's pollution every game second. But this is only if the pollution in that chunk is greater than 20. So let's say there's a chunk where there's a biter nest. If the pollution is only like 14, then it's just going to absorb all the pollution. It just absorbs the total pollution. It's going to absorb 14. But if it's 100, if it's like 100, right, it's going to absorb 20 plus 1% times 100. So 1% of 100 is what, 1? So it's going to absorb like 21 pollution every game second. Okay? And then pretty much the pollution cloud itself that you see with the advanced info on, it attracts the biters to your factory. So biters who are in a pollution area or a polluted area try to reach the source of the pollution and destroy it, which is why a lot of times the biters will go for like your power setup or your mining drills or stuff like that, because they generate the most pollution. Obviously they won't always, but typically in my case they do. And they will go for radars and stuff because military buildings have a pretty high priority on their attack list too. But yeah, so they're attracted to the pollution and try to destroy its source. Okay, now here's how this works with the spawners absorbing it and sending out biters. Higher pollution levels decrease the time it takes for biters to join an attack force. So when you see the biters like kind of gathering in a group randomly, well, it's not random, but it may seem random until you know this, is they gather in a group before they attack. That's what this is, right? So this is the spawner absorbing the pollution and sending out biters, okay? So higher pollution decreases the time it takes for a spawner to send biters/spitters to an attack force. After a certain amount of pollution is absorbed by a spawner, it sends one of its biters/spitters to a rendezvous point, which is where you see them grouping. And then at a random time between 1 and 10 minutes, so it could be 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 8 minutes, whatever, it's random. Between 1 and 10 minutes, the force will launch an attack, okay? So that's pretty much how often. And then here's a chart of the pollution required to add another biter spitter to the attack wave from that spawner, right? So 200 pollution, send out another small biter, 1,000 pollution, another medium biter, so on and so forth. You can read through these. Again, if the evolution factor is not high enough for these to be spawning anyway, it won't just spawn them for no reason. It's only going to spawn what it has to work with in the evolution factor. Okay, so that's how that works. That's how the pollution affects their attacks and how big the attacks are. Right? So we got that. One quick other thing to go over here is modules. So like productivity modules increase the pollution of the machine they're in. And the level 1 increases it by 30%. We just know that. That's how much it is. Right? An important thing to note is the thing that increases it by a percent increases the multiplier, not a flat pollution rate, right? So you take the pollution multiplier, which is 30% on a level 1 productivity module, you multiply that by the energy usage multiplier, which we'll go over in a second, and then you multiply that by the base pollution. Okay, so essentially, if you have, like, let's just say you have like an electric mining drill, I don't know that you can even put productivity modules in there, but okay, let's go with an assembler. You have a productivity module and an assembler. You're going to take the pollution the assembler generates times the energy multiplier of it times the 30%. So it's essentially, if you have even just a couple machines that are really heavily boosted with like productivity modules, that's actually going to probably contribute to most of your pollution just with those alone. So that's something to keep in mind. So if we go here to our internet browser, make sure I'm recording this. Okay, so here's our chart of how much pollution each thing produces per second at full power. Excuse me, I'm like losing my voice. And then this is the energy consumption, pollution per kilowatt per game second. So if we go with an assembler, let's go with a level 2. Yeah, let's go with a level 3. It's 3. It'll round it to 3. It's 3. Okay, we'll just say it's 3. So it produces 3 pollution per second by itself, and then we also take the pollution per game second per kilowatt, right? So we got to multiply that in here. So essentially, you would just, like, if you had one productivity module in there, you would multiply the 0, where's our assembler? The 0.03333 per kilowatt. You would multiply that by 30% and by 3, right? And it would add quite a bit. I'm not going to do the math, but essentially it's quite a lot because obviously this takes more than kilowatt. If we see here, if we can go in and see how much power it actually takes, I forget. I think it's like a few kilowatts. Okay, 90 watts, right? I think there's what, like 1,000 kilowatts. I'm not going to do the math, but essentially that's how that works. So when you throw like productivity models and stuff, it's really going to bump up your pollution. That's just something to keep in mind. Okay. So last thing to go over here, if we have the depolluters. Spawners absorb it, already went over that. Trees absorb it, already went over that. So here we go, the chunks. Every chunk has a natural absorption rate per tick. Remember, there's 60 ticks per actual second, which is determined by the weighted average of its floor tiles. So this is where it gets complicated. And then these following numbers are the pollution reduction for a full chunk composed of the same floor tiles per tick. So essentially, it's hard to explain, and I'm not even sure because it's kind of complicated. So to get the weighted average, my guess, I'm not a math whiz. Anyway, get the weighted average. Pretty much, let's just say we had one chunk with 50% dark sand and 50% dry grass. And there's 1,024 tiles per chunk because 32 times 32. Let's just say that, so half, so 512 times 0.2 gives us like 102.4. And then if we go 512 times, or shit. Oops. Yeah, sure. Equals, go away. Okay. 512 times point, what was it? 0.4? 204.8, right? Then to get an average, you add these together. And then you divide it by the total amount of things being calculated, which is 1,024. Right? So we have that. Now, I did this once, and my math was kind of off, but essentially what I needed to do was just is essentially move a decimal over. So we have a 0.3 here. That would be pretty much what a tile of 50% dark sand and 50% dry grass would reduce the pollution by per tick, right? Well, actually, this would be per second because we use these per second values. But that's with no trees or no other types or no water or anything, right? So if we go back into our game here, you can look at the trees really quick, how much they do it. And now this is per tick, right? There's no second chart. So if you wanted a per second value, you would have to multiply these values by 60, since there's 60 ticks in 1 second. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind. If we switch back to recording Factorio, right, if we go into here and we turn on this number here is the absorption, like reduction factor, right? So 0.008. That's what that is. Taking into account everything, that at least that's what the wiki said. So I don't know, it's a little confusing, really, in terms of that. But really the main things you just need to know is once it hits 15, it spreads at 2% of the total chunks amount to each adjacent chunk, and then they spread once they hit 15. And yeah, so you can see pollution can get pretty high because we have 150, and it's going down obviously and back up a little because the thing's producing, and then these are sending pollution back to it, but it's still spreading out to these adjacent ones, so on and so forth. But this is just with one burner miner. I mean, like, imagine an entire factory. I mean, so it gets really high. So I hope this information was helpful. I hope you could understand it and I didn't make it too complicated. The figuring out the absorption thing with the actual chunks is kind of, it's confusing. Because I'm not very good, like, I'm not a math wizard. I mean, I'm okay at math, but trying to figure it all out. The weighted average, I'm pretty confident that that's how you get the math we just did with the little calculator. But then factoring in trees and the different types and stuff, it gets kind of complicated. But unless you really, really are like just either curious or are doing something like really crazy that requires super, super specific math for pollution, that other stuff isn't that important. The main important stuff is just what we went over on how it spreads and like by how much and stuff. So that, I think, covers it, guys. I hope this gave you a more in-depth view of how pollution actually works and how it affects attacks and the evolution factor. Again, the evolution factor from pollution is not increased when the spawners absorb it, but rather just by how much pollution you're producing from all your machines, regardless of if it's touching spawners or not. Okay, so that covers that. The next one will probably be on the evolution factor, so we can go more in depth about that and which things increase it specifically and by how much, so on and so forth. I'd love to hear your feedback. Let me know any suggestions you have for these type of videos. If you enjoyed this, if you don't enjoy it, anything, definitely let me know. I'd love to hear it. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed and found it informative. But until next time, I look forward to seeing you all, and do take care.